Hi there, and welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. What a week. The world is still reeling from the terrorist attacks in Paris and all the questions and the safety and fighting ISIS that go along with it. But a bigger debate has started over Syrian refugees and how many should be allowed into the U.S., including here in Michigan. Coming up tonight, we'll discuss Governor Snyder's decision to stop encouraging Syrian refugees to come into Michigan and why other governors are taking an even harder line. And we'll talk about how the Paris attacks are impacting security in the United States. Also coming up tonight, Flint is hooked up to the Detroit water system, but that doesn't mean the health crisis is over. It is just beginning. We will take a look at the fallout from Flint to Washington, D.C. And Stephen Henderson takes a project on near and dear to him. We'll talk about his efforts to revive a Detroit neighborhood where he grew up. But we start tonight with a story that has topped this week's headlines. The deadly terrorist attacks in Paris has the United States on high alert. Here in Michigan, Governor Snyder has suspended efforts to relocate Syrian refugees to the state. He says Homeland Security should review its vetting process to make sure that terrorists don't slip into the U.S. Over 20 other governors have also gone on record opposing the entry of refugees into their states. And that's where we start tonight with our contributors Nolan Finley from the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press. Guys, it's good to see you, and amazing how the conversation in the world changes in just a week. From last Thursday, this wasn't even on our radar screen, to everything that then happened until now. And now we're hearing of potential ISIS is obviously threatening Washington and New York right now. Nolan.
Yeah, and you mentioned the governor and the refugees, and we supported the governor when he said we want to bring 10,000 or more refugees right to Michigan to help us repopulate our cities and bring in much-needed skills and workers to the state. But I think he took the only path he could this week. It was a prudent decision. He was very careful over and over to say this is not a permanent stop. He's committed still to resettling refugees here, but you had to reassure the people, and I think that's good for both the refugees and the people of Michigan to hear more about the vetting process to make sure everybody's comfortable when those folks rely here. It's actually what the president should have done on Tuesday when he spoke about this. Instead, he threw a temper tantrum. That didn't do any good for the cause. I mean, these are legitimate concerns people have. They're looking at Paris and they're frightened. There's good answers to the questions. These people are carefully vetted. There's no reason to shut this program down, but the people do need a little reassurance, and they need to know how the vetting process works.
All right, before we take a deeper dive into the vetting process, let me ask you about the governor's decision to step out and say, you know what, we're going to not push our efforts in having more Syrian refugees here.
Well, I mean, it was a play to the sort of jingoism and bigotry that lies at the far extremes of this conversation. Because the truth is, he has no control over how many Syrian refugees come to the United States or come to Michigan. The fact is that states' borders are open. I mean, if they come to Ohio or if they come to Kentucky or Indiana, they can get to Michigan just as easily as they can get anywhere else. He has no real power to stop that from happening. I think if he had framed it differently and said, listen, we still want to do this. We want Homeland Security to be more vigilant than they maybe were prepared to be, to make sure that they don't come here as terrorists, don't let terrorists in, and stopped there, it would have been fine. But there was a real play to hard right politics on his PAC page, on all these places where this pushback against this idea of Syrian refugees coming here and causing trouble is bubbling up. So it was a little disappointing.
You look at his piece in Time, there was none of that. In fact, over and over, he said, we need these people here. We want these people here. We want to resume the program. But he said exactly what you said he should say. We want to hear from Homeland Security. We want to hear from the State Department. I don't know anything about that. I didn't see it.
The part that I'm pushing back against is the idea that he should somehow slow this. He has no control over that.
He has no control over that, but the states do receive federal funding to help out with refugees who are then centered in their states. And other governors have taken a harder stance on this, Nolan, saying that maybe they would turn that funding down and wouldn't want refugees in their state. And the governor did not not say that.
You
he
have
was
to read that
much
piece.
more nuanced in
Right.
what his opinion was.
I mean, he wasn't even nuanced. He flat out says we're waiting for some reassurance from Homeland Security and the State Department, but we want to continue this program. And he made a very powerful statement about the benefits of the refugees. This is what I say that had the president done what Snyder did and try to reassure people and say, look, we're putting in steps, we're putting in processes. All he had to say is we've been letting refugees in this country for 20 years. Not one of them has turned out to
Never
be a
been the
terrorist.
problem.
And that's the kind of thing a president needs to say to the people. And the president spoke as if he was talking only to Republican presidential candidates and not to people. It's not just the far right. It's a broad swath of America who looked at what happened in Paris and are frightened about this.
I think
there are a lot of people beating the drums. He needs to calm them.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's very interesting also when you take a look at Michigan that we have the third highest number of Syrian refugees that have come here. So California, Texas, then us. But we've had this, and you said this in this conversation, that we've made this, we want immigrants here, we want people to come and work. By the governor coming out and saying, and no matter how nuanced his statements were, does that then turn people off from wanting to come here? If you're not even Syrian refugees, but immigration.
More importantly, it sends this message that stokes the fear as opposed to allaying it. I mean, we got to start facing some reality. Number one, it's true that no refugees have committed terrorist. There are more angry white males in America who've committed terrorist acts than refugees. So let's start there. The second thing that's true is that people got to start understanding what's going on in Syria and why it's happening. So much of our policy over the last 15 years in that region has fueled the instability in Syria, the civil war there, the factions that are coming in from Iraq are coming in because we dissolved the Iraqi army. That made it possible for these factions to sort of coalesce and start causing trouble. So we've got to start thinking about, instead of saying, oh my gosh, there's going to be a terrorist attack, which there should be security about, we should be concerned and try to prevent it. We also need to start talking about what's causing all of this trouble in the first place and how we might play a role in turning that around. And that's a really difficult conversation with people who are scared, but stoking those fears is irresponsible.
And I didn't see anything the governor did that stoked the fear. He was very careful to talk about the benefits of immigration, his desire for immigration. What he was trying to do is take a step back and be prudent and take the steps the president should have taken to tell the people this is going to be okay. Exactly as you said, these folks come here, they contribute, they've never been a problem. That's the message that he's trying to get out. I think Michigan would be a perfect place for a summit on of all the governors and the State Department, the Homeland Security, how we can make this work. All people want to know is that this program is going to be carefully executed.
All right, so just about 24 hours ago, Brooks Patterson came out, though, because they are building some housing in Pontiac, where they're ready to receive some Syrian refugees, and there are about 78 of them in Oakland County right now. The most, 66 of them, are in Troy. A lot of people think about Dearborn as the largest location for Syrian refugees, and that is not true right now. But what kind of disturbed me a little bit is Brooks wrote a letter to the mayor saying that you ought to halt this city project for Syrian refugees and saying, can you give the residents, and I'm quoting him here, of Pontiac absolute assurance that the refugees they intend to house in their community would not contain one or two ISIS infiltrators? Of course you can't, and therein lies the risk. And that was a direct quote taken from one of the papers. That's disturbing to me.
Well, and that's exactly the sort of questioning claim that needs to be countered. This vetting process is an 18-month process, a 20-month process sometimes. I think if we just slow down and said we're going to take families first, we're going to take older refugees first, we're not going to cut off the flow, and then we're going to put young single refugees, male refugees in their 20s and 30s, sort of at the back of the line while we look at their social media, while we vet them a little more carefully, I think the American people would buy on. But you've got this misinformation here that, oh, they're not documented at all, they're not vetted at all. That's simply not true.
And look at the numbers. I mean, you're talking about less than 20% of the population of the refugees who fall into that category in the first place. Most of them are families, women, children, older people. Very few of them are young males, partially because so many of the young males in Syria are involved in fighting the war. They're not fleeing. they've been caught up in one of the factions that's involved in the civil war. And again, understanding what is going on in that region is one of the things that we have got to get people to be able to do, to be able to process all of this stuff.
One of the questions they're dealing with in Europe is trying to separate out the economic refugees, people who are using this as an opportunity to come and get a better economic life, jobs, to those who are truly at risk, fearful, in danger, displaced from their homes. I'm not sure that's such a big problem in this country, because the difference between here and Europe, I mean, we've been watching this, all we know of refugees is what we've been seeing on television from Europe, where they take boats across, where they can walk across. To get into this country, there's a whole lot of paperwork involved. Sure. There is an ocean separating us.
And it takes a year and a half to almost 2 years on average, is what they're saying, to do this. What bothers me about this entire conversation that is happening surrounding what happened in Paris is how inflammatory everything has gotten. Whether it's seeping into the presidential race, where people are talking about, well, we could let Syrian refugees in, but only Christian Syrian refugees, or you have a mayor in Roanoke who is talking about the internment of the Japanese from World War II, saying that we should do something similar than what we did then, which is one of the most shameful parts of American history. So to me, what is bothersome is watching the way this is being talked about. Nolan, are we concentrating on the right thing here?
Well, what's happening here is we're letting the fearmongers control the conversation. Now, I'll go back to my original point. That performance by the president on Tuesday was disastrous for this cause. He was petulant, he was condescending, he was angry. He needed to be reassuring, because people do look at Paris and do have some legitimate fears. I mean, it's natural that people are afraid, particularly when you have ISIS saying, we're going to do exactly that. We're going to plant terrorists among the refugees, trying to stoke those flames of resentment and fear. We need our leaders. I think Governor Snyder did a good job of that, of saying, let's step back and take a careful, rational look at this, and here's how the process worked. I think if people understood how the process worked a little better, I think a lot of this would die down.
Can you truly explain to people how this process worked? And I think we're going to see now a showdown in Congress with the House, who's now saying that we should have different regulations about letting refugees in. Can you truly explain Stephen, to people what this process is without jeopardizing security in some way?
What do you mean by
the process of vetting refugees?
Well, I mean, I don't think you're jeopardizing security by telling people that, look, there's a process, and then that process ferrets out people who have histories or even indications of being terrorists, and again, you couch that in the information that exists about what's going on. There have never been terrorist refugees in this country. The refugees who are coming from Syria don't even fit the profile, for the most part, of people who commit acts of terrorism. I don't think you have to jeopardize security to make this clear. I think you have to stop playing to the fears that people have, the irrational fears that people have, and there are a lot of people doing it. I don't think the president's one of them, by the way. I think that the president was trying to push back against some of this nonsense that you hear from governors around the country. They're absolutely saying things that are not true to justify irrational policy. I think he had an obligation to meet that where it was.
Wrong message. And it might not be a bad time to pause and make sure Homeland Security is doing its job. That hasn't been the most effective agency. So I think it's not unfair to say,
it's been effective enough that no refugees have ever done anything
at this point. And I think it's not a bad time to say, look, let's hear from Homeland Security. Let's hear from State Department. Let's make sure you are doing your job. I think what the message here should be constant reassurance of the American people, and also a little better education on how terrorism does come to this country. A lot easier to recruit people on the internet and homegrown terrorists than to sneak them through in refugees. There's no vetting process on the internet-bred terrorism, and that's the greater threat. It's better to focus people on the right threat. Exactly.
Frankly.
So it's better to focus people on the right threat than the wrong threat.
All right, well, we'll have to continue to watch this, because in Washington, we know lawmakers want to push for increased screening, and the president has threatened to veto any kind of legislation there. So we'll have to keep watching that.